If you want a divorce, you'll have to pay me compensation, I declared. That's fine by me. I'll even write you a formal promise to pay. If I can cut ties with you for money, that's a bargain. I've wanted to break up with a nitpicky woman like you for a while now, my husband replied with a smile as he signed the divorce papers. Little did he know he was about to descend into hell. I'm a 28-year-old housewife, living with just my husband and no children. Although we've been married for 3 years, I first met my husband 10 years ago. Back then, I was a high school senior preparing for college entrance exams. I desperately wanted to attend a particular university, but my school told me it would be difficult with my current grades. That's when I started studying intensively with a tutor, who would later become my husband. My husband was attending a prestigious university at the time, and he was an exceptional teacher. Thanks to him, my grades improved dramatically, and I was able to get into my dream university. We lost touch after the tutoring contract ended, but a few years later, we unexpectedly ran into each other at a drinking party I attended with friends. We started dating, and after a year of courtship, we got married. Now we rent an apartment together, splitting the rent equally between us. To be honest, the apartment is quite spacious for just the two of us and the rent is rather high, but we chose a place with extra rooms thinking about having children in the future. Our life together was as happy as when we were tutor and student, filled with smiles every day. However, my once kind husband gradually changed, and now I'm suffering from his emotional abuse. He's become incredibly condescending, constantly bringing up his prestigious university background. Whenever we have a disagreement, he keeps bringing up my college entrance exam days. Who do you think got you into university? Are you really in a position to argue with me? You wouldn't have made it to college without me, so don't forget what you owe me. He's always looking down on me. But my husband wasn't always like this. It all started about a year ago when he changed jobs. He had been working at a top-tier company but quit after fighting with his boss. When he tried to find a new job, he couldn't get into any of his preferred companies. He eventually ended up at a small company through a friend's introduction, but with a significant pay cut. From then on, he would come home complaining, "Damn it. Why should someone from a top university like me work at such a company?" His pride was probably getting in the way of fitting in at work. That's when he started treating me harshly, as if putting me down was the only way he could maintain his pride. I put up with it because I felt indebted to him for helping me with my college entrance exams, and I believed he would get back on his feet eventually. I could tolerate whatever hurtful things he said. But now I'm reaching my limit. With his low salary and no savings, our finances are quite tight. I've been working part-time just to manage the monthly rent. Then something happened that dramatically changed my life. My father suddenly passed away due to illness, and I inherited a substantial estate. My father had been an executive at a famous company and owned several properties. I inherited one of them, an apartment building in a prime location with considerable asset value. Of course, my husband, my mother, and I all mourned my father's death. However, it's also true that his inheritance eased our financial situation. That's when my husband's behavior became even worse. He stopped contributing to our living expenses and spent almost all his salary on entertainment. He probably thought everything would be fine now that I had inherited my father's estate. To make matters worse, he started dipping into our joint savings that we had been setting aside for when we had children. When I confronted him about this terrible behavior, he just brushed me off, saying, "What's the problem? It's fine, isn't it? Stop nitpicking about every little thing." Our relationship became increasingly strained after that. Then one day, my husband came home in an unusually good mood. When I asked what happened, he said a young woman had approached him. He was elated, saying, well, looks like I've become quite famous. Come to think of it, he had recently been photographed for a local magazine's Street Snap section. My husband has always been good-looking, and the photo turned out very well, creating quite a buzz online. He started getting recognized on the streets more often and became rather full of himself. While I initially thought his good mood was fine, his newfound confidence led him to start playing around with women. He began picking up women on the street and using dating apps to meet and go out with them. His phone was full of conversations with various women. It seemed like all the recognition he'd been lacking at work suddenly exploded. When I confronted him about this unacceptable behavior, he denied any affair. There's nothing wrong with it. We're just going to karaoke and stuff, not having relationships. You're so nitpicky about everything. While I didn't have concrete evidence, and he wasn't staying out particularly late, I reluctantly turned a blind eye. However, this only encouraged him, and his behavior gradually escalated. He started coming home late even on weekdays, sometimes stumbling and drunk at dawn. Just as I was reaching my limit and thinking about confronting him seriously, something unimaginable happened. It was during dinner time one evening. I was preparing dinner, expecting him to return from work soon, when he came home with a flashily dressed woman I'd never seen before. From her appearance, she clearly wasn't a coworker. When I asked, "Who is this person?" he barely answered, just saying, "Never mind that. We need to talk," and ushered us all to the table. Facing my confused expression, my husband said, "Look, I love this woman. I'm sorry, but would you divorce me?" I was so stunned by this sudden declaration that I couldn't comprehend what he was saying. As I sat there bewildered, my husband continued speaking matter-of-factly. Apparently, he had met this woman recently through a dating app, and what started as casual fun had turned serious. Now he was thinking about marriage. Completely shocked, I naturally couldn't accept this and shouted at them both, "Are you kidding me? What are you thinking?" But the woman smirked and said, "Well, you see, he says he prefers me over you. I hear you're always nagging about little things. No wonder he's grown tired of someone like you. It must be exhausting to never get any peace." I couldn't take this anymore and burst out, "How dare you mock me like this? Fine. I get it. I'm done with someone like you. If you want to marry this woman, go ahead. But both of you will have to pay me proper compensation." My love for my husband had completely cooled, and I felt more disgusted than sad. My husband, unused to me standing up to him, seemed irritated and sneered, "Huh? Compensation? Fine, whatever. If I can cut ties with you for money, that's cheap. I've wanted to break up with a nitpicky woman like you for a while anyway." I was a bit surprised by how calmly he agreed, given his low salary and lack of savings. Suspicious of his attitude, I made him write and sign a formal promise to pay the compensation in full. Even then, he signed it saying, "You don't need to do all this, I'll pay properly, don't worry. You really are so finicky about everything." While his easy compliance felt somewhat odd, I was so fed up that I never wanted to see his face again. I packed my things and immediately headed to my parents' home. I avoided contact with him after that, but eventually, he called me. With his usual insolent attitude, he said, "Hey, about the divorce, I signed the papers and sent them to you today. When you get them, sign them and submit them to the city office." I wanted nothing to do with him anymore and was about to hang up after a brief response when he suddenly added, "Oh, and make sure you handle the division of assets properly." I was quite surprised as he hadn't mentioned this before, but we didn't have much in the way of marital assets to discuss. The only thing worth mentioning was our joint savings, which had dwindled to a few $100s due to his wasteful spending. When I asked for clarification, he came out with something outrageous. Don't you know? When you divorce, you have to split all the assets between husband and wife. You inherited that real estate recently, right? That apartment in the prime location that's worth quite a bit? Oh, but I'm not saying you need to give me the apartment, just pay me half its assessed value. My husband was actually trying to claim my inherited property. He arrogantly insisted that everything had to be split 50-50 in a divorce, and while he had nothing to give me, I had to give him half of what I owned. This explained his earlier attitude. He had agreed to pay compensation so easily because he was counting on getting money from the division of assets. Once you transfer the money to me, I'll pay the compensation for Sarah and me out of that. Please do it as soon as possible, he said, about to hang up. Sarah was the name of that woman he'd brought home. At this point, I couldn't help but laugh. I see, so that's what this was about. No wonder you agreed to the compensation so easily. My husband was confused by my reaction. After I finished laughing, I was done dealing with his stupidity. Hey, do you even know what division of marital assets means? You don't actually think it means splitting everything everyone owns in half, do you? I asked. Huh? What do you mean? Listen, only joint property is subject to division. What? Joint what? I can't believe this. You don't even know that? Look, only assets accumulated together during marriage are subject to division. Individual property, like inherited assets, is called separate property and isn't divided. That includes the apartment I inherited. My husband clearly started to panic. What? That can't be. I was speechless at his level of stupidity. This hopeless man had been counting on my assets to pay even the divorce compensation. He probably thought he could even pay rent with the money he'd get from me. Well, I had his signed promise to pay compensation in full, and that wasn't going to change. All that was left was to submit the divorce papers he'd sent today to make us officially strangers. He was shouting something on the other end of the phone, but I ignored him. Finally, I said, you know, you're always bragging about graduating from a prestigious university, but you didn't even know this? Instead of clinging to past glory, why don't you face reality? You're just a regular employee in your 30s now. If you keep acting like this, you're going to have a tough life ahead. My words hit home, and he suddenly became emotional and started crying. I'm trying my best, but things just aren't working out. Hearing this, I lost all sympathy for him. While I used to listen to his insecurities before, that was when we were husband and wife. Now that we were getting divorced, this kind of thing wouldn't work anymore. This is exhausting. Why don't you talk about this with your new wife instead? That is, if you can keep her around, I said before hanging up. That evening, as promised, the divorce papers arrived from my husband. I filled them out immediately and submitted them to the city office. In the end, my husband couldn't pay the compensation, and his parents had to cover it, for which he got an earful. He also couldn't afford rent anymore and was evicted from his apartment. Of course, I also demanded and received compensation from his mistress, though her parents ended up paying that too. Apparently, that woman had been impressed by my husband's prestigious university background and thought he was an elite. She had been excited about living in a luxury apartment, but quickly left him after learning his true nature. He had probably filled his dating app profile with fancy words and lied about his current income. After losing his apartment and being abandoned by the woman, my husband had no choice but to move back in with his parents. I heard he's practically under house arrest there, under his parents' strict supervision. Well, I hope he works hard to pay back the compensation they covered for him. As for me, I started working full-time, wanting to live independently without relying on my father's inheritance. Through a friend's introduction, I met a wonderful man and we're dating happily. This time, I'm carefully evaluating his character to ensure my next marriage will be a happy one.